I left for 6 weeks and I came back. And it literally was like I never left. And it was like this epiphany of, man, I'm wasting a lot of my life. And that's really the moment where I was like, okay, I got to get out of this.
Brian, thank you for joining the show. Not many times do I have aerospace engineers who get into tax lien business, but hey, we want to learn about why you did that and what's going on. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks, Latane, for having me. Yeah, it's kind of been a unique path. I may not be the only one out there. I'm the only one that I know.
Well, yeah. So tax liens, I actually have a little familiarity, and that word is very hard for me. But I actually bought a property that someone had a tax lien on it. They had held it for ages before they were able to sell it. So from what I remember is back in the day, you were able to buy some of these properties and buy the tax liens very, very cheap. And then eventually over many, many years, you get that property and there's some margin in there if you're willing to put up with all the pain and suffering. But I believe from what you've told me in the past is with a Supreme Court ruling recently, it's actually changed things. Tell us about how it was done in the past and kind of how it's done now.
Yeah. So historically, really left it up to the states to decide how do they want to enforce, the payment of property taxes. The whole space is built around, all right, everybody owes property taxes, the counties typically, or I call them jurisdictions. Sometimes it's at the city level. Jersey, they want that capital. They want to balance their budget. They got to pay firemen. They got to pay policemen. They got to pave the roads. They got to do all those things. And so the whole space was built around the county wanting the capital, looking to outside investors to get that capital, and then saying, hey, for that capital, right, the penalty that we typically, charge the property owner for paying their taxes late, we'll give that to you, right, as the investor, right? That's the general concept is the enforcement. And they really left it up to the states to decide how to enforce it. As typically, you kind of had a few different systems that came to light, and then a lot of the states just adapted whoever invented it. It was way before my time. But you did end up with states that had the sale of tax liens, right? It was just a sale of interest in the property. That's what you mentioned. You had states that sold tax deeds, which is like selling the property itself. Some states that implemented both processes. You'd sell the lien at the end of that, right? They'd do a deed sale. But there were several states, many states, that you could buy the lien, right? As from an investor's perspective, yes, you had to wait years, in some cases 3 to 5 years or more. But at the end of the day, the capital that you're out is the back taxes for 5 years, which is very small compared to the value of the house, plus some legal fees. And the county would eventually say, hey, you as a lien holder, here's a deed to the property. Mm-hmm. And you got all of that extra equity at no extra price, right? Mm-hmm. That was how it worked. And that's really how I think this concept that I think is pretty popular on the web of like buying properties for pennies on the dollar, right? And in reality, that's a very, very small fraction of properties that made it that far, that you could end up with a deed. But I guess in the reality is it was possible, right? Just like a lottery. And so I guess it's fairly realistic. What changed, right, with the Supreme Court case, it's called Tyler versus Hennepin. I don't know, some background so people kind of know.
Yeah. And what year was that too?
Well, I think it started in 2017 is when the first the case, which was started in Minnesota. I didn't know of it at the time, quite frankly. I'm on the board of the National Tax Lien Association, and I ended up being appointed the lead of this committee that was tasked with trying to monitor I'll call the fallout of the results of the case, which that didn't start until 2023-ish is really when the Supreme Court. So 6 years for them to do this. But essentially what the Supreme Court case said in that instance, right? And again, I'm not an attorney, right? And this is probably, for anybody that is going, wow, that's not exactly what it says. Sorry.
Ish is good. Ish is good.
This would be very ish. But it basically said, hey, the county in that particular state, which is Minnesota, their process was the county would foreclose on the asset, take ownership of it, resell it, and then keep all of the excess proceeds. The Supreme Court said that's not okay, right? The county can keep what is due to them, meaning the back taxes plus whatever penalties and interest. But if there's excess equity, that needs to be available to the previous owner or other lien holders, right? So if there's a mortgage on the property, they should be able to get access to that, etc. The other thing they basically stated was that unless there's a mechanism for the fair market value of that property to be established, then that's not constitutional. And so all of these states where you could buy a lien and go straight to a deed without establishing fair market value, which equates to having an auction of the property itself, not just the lien, that was unconstitutional. So several states like Arizona, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, there's a bunch. I think there was like 17 states that had that process. They had to go back and change their statutes because what they were doing was not constitutional. And they've changed it in different different ways, but most of them have accepted that selling just the lien without a deed sale, at least option, is not the way to go. Buying the lien and owning the property for cents on the dollar is really, I call it a dinosaur, right?
Yeah.
There's a few out there today. It's not going to be there 5 years from now. And so that's just the way the industry's going.
That's a good system there. That's a good recap on kind of how it all worked. And so that's changed things. So is there a lot of gray areas still today? So fair market value, how do you determine that fair market value? Let's say you go through the process and you sell something for $100,000. What happens if you can't find the past owner? What's that process to get them the money? Like, give us a little background on that.
Yeah, the nice thing is it's not on the buyer of the tax deed to find the previous owner and make that available to them. And the group Pacific Legal Foundation, which is the group fighting on behalf of the previous owner in the Tyler Hennepin Supreme Court case, has said right that's really needs to be done through a process where the previous owner has the right to, but not that it's hey, here's a check and send it to them. That is the latest argument. You asked if it was kind of gray, right? And more and more I've dealt with legal stuff. Everything's gray, right? The current argument or gray space that's being talked more about is like, okay, how do you establish fair market value? What is fair market value? I think the best answer to that holds up in court is an auction of some sort. We believe through the data is that, a property might be worth $100,000, but because of I call them inefficiencies, right? There's not as many people attending the auction. You can't get bank financing. You have to have cash. That stuff is still sold less than what I would consider like max market value, like what you could get if you listed it on MLS and you could go get a loan on it, right? That value is much, much higher. So there's certainly opportunities for investors to buy at the auctions, do the value add, right? They fix the title things, right? They make it available through sale on an MLS basis and they capture that delta. Right. That's the play that is going on today.
And so you started doing this in Montana, is that right?
Yeah.
And are you still doing your own properties? I know you've moved to the software you built that, many are using. Are you still purchasing your own?
Yes, but in a different fashion. Yeah, I guess I'm originally from Montana. Actually, I didn't grow up with aspirations of being a tax sale software designer or anything like that. What happened is I had an epiphany along the road, it's another story, and said, hey, maybe aerospace engineering is not what I want to do the rest of my life, and started looking at other things. And I think many people, when they start looking at other things, fall into real estate, and that's what I did. Now, it had nothing to do with tax sales. It was just buying and flipping properties, and I was doing that in Montana on a couple, and then the housing crash in 2008-ish, right? I ended up upside down. We were working through that process. We did have a couple of mortgages. Nice thing is it wasn't catastrophic for me. I won't say yes, it was life-changing and it put me on a different path, but I wasn't facing bankruptcy. We were working through it with the bank, and the weird thing about Montana is for tax lien investors, each of them have to send a certified letter. And so I didn't just get one notice on our property that was upside down. I got like 40 notices in the mail, all from different people. That's really what made me go, what is this all about? If I just got it from the county, I would have not even thought twice about it. But the fact that I got all those sent me down the path of researching tax liens, and eventually said, well, okay, maybe now is not the time to buy properties. Maybe I'll do this tax lien thing. So I call it a small fund, started buying tax liens in Montana and Wyoming initially. Now, fast forward, actually, ended up building a software and actually gave up buying liens directly just because there's only so many hours in the day, and focused on the software side. Now, that was in 2012, 13. Now in 2020, 2021, which is when we started Mountain of Capital, we essentially are the capital partner to local tax deed guys, because most tax deed investors are cash strapped because you can't get bank financing. And so we come in, we understand the space, we understand the risks. We are able to provide capital. So instead of them having 200,000 and being able to buy 2, 3, 4 properties, they can have $1 million and buy 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 properties, and they're much more active doing what they're already doing. So, but the way that's structured is Mountain of Capital ends up owning those. So in an odd way, yes, I still invest directly. Yeah, I guess technically on a large basis. We placed $35-40 million last year, but it's not necessarily for me personally. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And so if I hear correctly, you actually, in a sense, have two products. You have a software, but you also have, it's almost almost like, I don't know, a hard money lender in a sense. So you have a fund that provides capital so people can purchase them. Are those the two products you currently have, or are there other products?
Those are two primary buckets, right?
Yeah.
There's on the software side, it is a research and data analytics tool. There's a portfolio management piece to it. And so for anybody that knows what they're doing, what we don't do is we're not an educator, we're not a coach in the space. We don't really teach people how to do this. But for anybody that is doing it or wants to learn, go there. There's plenty of coaches out there, and you want to go through that process and then come back. Then the tools we provide are essentially everything you need to be successful.
Give us some details of what it provides seasoned veterans in the space.
Yeah, so at the heart of it, we're the only one that we're aware of so far that actually aggregates, it's over 9,000 auctions a year in about 5,000 we call jurisdictions. There's 3,200 counties, but then there's some states that do it at the city level as well. And we collect those lists and monitor those auctions ourselves, right? And so before us, I don't believe anybody was doing it, and I still don't think anybody is doing it on that level. There's several folks that license our data to redo it. But at the heart of it is just knowing when and where these auctions are on a nationwide scale. And then we then process and aggregate all of that data so you can boil all of those. Like right now, I looked this morning, there was like 700,000 tax liens and deeds going up for sale right now. Like, how do you pick which ones are good to buy? And so the software helps you narrow that down and find the better deals. And that's really what the software side does.
Can you do an auction remotely? Can you do virtually? Is there laws where you have to be there in person?
Yeah, well, good things that come out of COVID, right? Prior to COVID, online auctions were fairly rare. There was a couple states that had bought into it. Florida had online auctions, and a few other jurisdictions throughout the country had, but it was less than 10% of the auctions held annually were online. COVID basically forced all these counties, right? Because you couldn't have live auctions with all these, massive people in a courtroom raising their hand, right? That was a big no-no. And so it forced a lot of counties. So I'd say over 70% of auctions now are online, and you can be remote, right? You can sit on the couch at home. Yeah, you don't have to be there in person. Now, in reality, right, because we do a lot of data analytics, you still get a lot better deals where the live auctions are, because the competition is naturally lower.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. No, this is very interesting. I mean, it's definitely a unique approach and one we've never had in the show. So I'm really excited to hear this. How did you make the decision to give up your past career and move on to this? Was it you were kind of moonlighting and you're making as much money on the side doing real estate, or was there another reason that you kind of made that move?
The first one was I got an internship my senior year of college as a design engineer, which is what I thought I wanted to do. And by the end of the first week, after staring at a computer screen, going home with a headache every day, I was like, this is not what I had in mind. I had my first early 20s crisis, and I need to find a different career. But I was already 4 years in, essentially, at that point. I was so deep that it was like, okay, do I want to go back to school, start over at something else, and have another 2-3 years of school? No. And so I basically said, all right, put your head down, finish out school, and go from there. But that was the first time that I realized like maybe engineering is not what I want to do. I was lucky enough out of school, I got a good job, but then within 6 months was offered a job at a company that did exactly what I always thought would be cool, something in space, right? And they were building both components. They were building the missiles that go up and shoot down other missiles in space, and then they were building the targets that mimic other countries' missiles that do that. And so I had a really cool job of putting all that stuff together. We'd fly our plane out into the Pacific Ocean. They pull this 80-foot rocket out of the back of a big plane. It'd go up in space and they'd shoot at it. Sounds really cool, all sorts of crazy things. But I remember thinking at the time, I was like, wow, I expect 2.5 years between launches. And I was like, man, it's a long time between launches. And so I called it 2 years of banging my head against the wall for 2 minutes of cool was the term that I gave it. That wasn't really enough to tip me over, but I ended up going on vacation down to Brazil for 6 weeks. At the time, I remember like leaving, and I was so worried about being away that long. And that's one giant advantage of being in corporate America, is the fact that you can actually leave work and somebody else takes care of it, and it's not really your problem when you come back. But I remember being so worried. But I left for 6 weeks and I came back, and it literally was like I never left. Yes, a lot of activity had gone on, but I jumped back in. I needed no getting up to speed. And it was like this epiphany of, man, I'm wasting a lot of my life if I can leave for 6 weeks and come back and not miss a beat. And that's really the moment where I was like, okay, I got to get out of this. I got to find something else that's more, satisfying. And I'd already started doing the flipping thing. So this was all kind of in tandem of the 2008, like lien notice that I just talked about. But that's where I decided, okay, that is going to be my focus. How do I get to doing that full time?
Yeah, no, I think I like how you said that. I was just speaking with someone yesterday who his daughter went to college for something, went through everything, and was like, I don't want to do this. I see what the real life is for this, changed path and, it's figured it out. And like, I used to be in the sports and entertainment industry. Sounds really cool when you're 23 and you're running adult sports leagues and obstacle races and big New Year's Eve parties all over the world. But when you have kids and you never see your family and you're traveling 7 days a week, it's like, this is not what I think I should be doing. I think people out there that are younger who are like, oh, I can't change the career. I put all this time in. It's like, no, I think you can. I mean, you learned a lot from those experiences and they'll find a way to come back and help you out. So, yeah. Give me the best deal you've ever seen within a tax lien as an investor or buyer, from your perspective. Give me a percentage return.
It was a single family home, happened to buy a few lottery tickets, was really zero intent of owning the property, just through the process of enforcement, ended up owning a property for, I think it was total, we were into it like 12 grand and it was worth like 130-ish. Yeah. So percentage wise, I wish I could do that all day long. I think that's the story that is told out on the web, but reality, that's far less than 1% of the liens ever sold end up in that state. So it wasn't something I could plan on doing.
Sure.
The largest one it's actually a commercial building, and the group that we're working with, it wasn't one that I found specifically, but the group that we ended up working with has asked me not to continue mentioning where it's at because it's getting more popular, but it was in Indiana. It was a 52,000 square foot building. It used to be a headquarters of a newspaper, right? And I think most people know newspapers are kind of declining, and ended up in a tax sale. A group bought it, didn't know what to do with it. And actually the group we funded bought it from the other investor, still as an uninsurable title, scenario, and bought that at a little less than $10 a square foot, right? And within 18 months, appraised it $65 a square foot, and that was an amazing return for that group as well. So those are kind of two ends of the spectrum. Can't say those happen all the time, but they do exist.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's good that you're even sharing though. Like you said, what's being promoted on the web is one thing. Less than 1% of them actually get to that point is what we really want to know. What are like the biggest risks within the industry? What are the horror stories? Like how much risk could you be taking on if things go bad? And what are those scenarios?
The biggest false thing that I've heard out there on the internet is, that this is guaranteed, right? In reality, the county's not trying to screw anybody over in doing this, but it's not their responsibility to tell you what is worth buying or not. And the example, unless you do your homework on the properties, you can buy liens on literally like chunks of sidewalk, right? When the county split up their parcels and build there's just these weird shaped parcels that come out of that. I've seen parcel that was a mailbox, right? And I've heard story of somebody buying the lien on that mailbox, and then 2 years later they go to foreclose on it, right? And nobody buys it at the auction. They're like, oh, right, I got this, tax deed in Florida, and they go finally to sell it, and nobody will pay them anything. They finally look at the parcel boundaries. It's like a 4 square foot mailbox, right? Who's going to buy that, right? Yeah. And if that investor had just simply looked at the parcel before they purchased and did some level of due diligence, they wouldn't be in that scenario. And those are the risks that are pretty easily avoided if you just do some simple due diligence, just like you would buying any other property, and not just assume incorrectly that this is not guaranteed. The county does not owe you anything, right? It's only if it redeems. So if you're not buying properties that nobody's going to redeem and nobody will have value in, then you're going to lose on it.
Are there attorneys out there who are suing people like, hey, you sold this, it was a tax lien previously, you haven't paid enough money to the previous owner, fair market value? Is that a thing that's happening in the industry?
Well, title insurance certainly is a thing you have to go through, right? And I guess understanding the industry is like, so you bought this tax deed, what do you have to do, right? So you can sell the property, but if you don't sell it with insurable title, yes, somebody can go back and say, hey, this wasn't taken care of. And so you do need to go through some level of quieting the title, right? And there's actual quiet title suit that can be filed. There's groups that do title certifications. Some states, the process is so bulletproof, you don't have to do any of that. But knowing the nuance one state to the next, right? And knowing what you should do with the property after you buy it, that's really like our specialty, is knowing that risk. And so when we are willing to partner with an investor, local investor, and say, hey, we'll use our capital, we'll buy it, we can partner on the and split the profit. We understand all that stuff, and most folks don't. And that's also another area where you can get in hot water of thinking you bought something great, right, but not understanding the title ramifications as
So
well.
it's not just money you're providing, but in a sense, it's strategic money. You're doing your due diligence. You're making sure it makes sense, which is going to provide more comfort for that investor too. Tell me about the scale of your software. How many people are using this type of software out there? I would think it would be extremely niche, but maybe it's not.
Well, I think it's still, pretty niche compared to a lot of software. I mean, I think there's between 4,000 and 5,000 users, like active investors utilizing it on a, I'll say, daily basis. There's, I think we have about 70,000 users in total. But you compare that to like typical real estate, I think it's probably on the par of, tax liens and deeds are about a $9 billion a year space, right? And I don't know, real estate in general in the US is multiple trillions, right?
Yes.
So it's a small fraction compared to, very large ones, but it's still a pretty hefty user base.
Oh, that's a significant user base. That's quite impressive. What are you guys seeing in, as we move forward into the future? What's the goal of the company? What are you looking at doing? Is it growing the software company as well as the ability to lend, or is there any other plans in play?
The thing that we've been doing for a long time is gathering results of sales. And I'd say the latest catchy term is AI, right? Is implementing at the heart of most AI is a fancy algorithm, right? They're large language models that, ChatGPT and Gemini and all those, like that's one fancy algorithm, but like USPS has been using AI to read your handwriting and figure out where envelope goes for a long time. And so we're essentially using an AI in a different format of looking at this, all of the data. We have a boatload of data, right? The cool thing about AI is we can use it to look at that data and help us determine where those better deals are going to be. Like the industry is becoming more and more competitive. And so our capital partnership program, right, where we partner with these local folks does two things, not just the capital, but we also use our analytics in helping point people in the right direction. And so you can get real frustrated trying to buy a taxi to discount in South Florida right now. I can tell you that because everybody and their mom can participate and everybody wants real estate in South Florida. So there's just not the deals that you can, but there are other parts of the country where you can still get a great deal. And so we use all of our analytics and helping point the investors that we work with. That'll be the focus that we're lasered in on for the next several years, really just enabling that and enhancing that as much as we can.
Very cool. We have a rapid fire section here where we ask random questions and get your initial response. What's the biggest myth about tax sales?
It's government guaranteed.
Is there a book people in this space should read?
Well, there's a couple. One's called Fast Five. It's how the Florida space works. And the other one is, I'm trying to think of the name of it. If you look up New Jersey tax sales, there's a book on how the tax sale process in New Jersey works. And it's a very comprehensive, great book. So between those two, you won't cover all the states, but between those two, you'll get a really good array of how this space works.
Cool. If you didn't end up in this market, this type of job, what do you think you'd be doing?
Probably something in ecology.
Cool. What's the number one thing you'd recommend for people getting into the space?
This is cliche, but doing your due diligence, I think from two perspectives, right? Understanding what to research on properties, because you're not just looking at property value, you're also looking at title underwriting to some degree. You have to look at the property from both perspectives, but then you need to also do your due diligence in talking to an attorney to figure out how the process works in a state. If you do those three things, you probably don't have all your bases covered, but you're way ahead of any other investor getting started in the space, and you've reduced your risk enormously.
For those people that are interested in working with you, what's the best way to find you?
Well, you go to taxsaleresources.com. There's actually a phone number, email. The phone actually goes, even in today's world with all these VR agents, etc. It does go to a real person. If you listen to this episode and just want to talk to me, just let our customer service know that's what you want to do, and they'll get you a point in the right direction.
Well, hey, look, I find this to be extremely interesting. A lot of times we're bringing on agents or loan officers to have this niche is quite interesting. The fact that you have 70,000 users at some point using your software, quite impressive, man. It's a great feat. Congratulations.
Well, thanks. Yeah, this is fun. You asked a lot of good questions. I don't typically get asked. It was good.
No, I appreciate it, and I'm sure it's funny. I've had, first of all, I didn't know if people ever listen to these podcasts, but I've had people reach out from all across the country like, I listen to your podcast every morning going in. I have a feeling people are going to start reaching out to you. And because it is such a niche thing, but there's obviously, if you do it the right way, you do your due diligence, there's opportunity here.
Yes, there's certainly opportunity if done the right way, for sure.
Well, really appreciate the time, and look forward to getting together sometime.
Likewise. Thanks, Latane. Thanks for having me on.